Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here on Saturday morning in Prague today. I'd like to express my gratitude for European Law Unbound Society for giving me opportunity to present my paper this morning. My paper is titled Rediscovering European Constitutional Identity. Is there any future for Christian constitutionalism? The focus of my lecture this morning will encompass two key elements: the crisis within the European Union and the Christian identity of Europe. It is well known that after adopting the Treaty of Lisbon in 2009, which replaced the proposed European Constitution, the European Union has faced significant crises over the past decade. These crises include the economic crisis in 2010, the migrant crisis in 2015, the Brexit crisis in 2017, and a democratic crisis involving Poland and Hungary in 2017, which led to invocation of Article 7 of Treaty European Union. Last, we can include the COVID-19 crisis that emerged in 2019. In response to these challenges, European Union leaders have attempted various measures to prevent the collapse of the Union, primarily through economic, political, and legal means. But there are concerns that the reforms implemented over the last decade resemble treating a very sick patient with only pain relief medications. There is a pressing need to identify the underlying causes of this crisis and to establish the proper diagnosis. Some have suggested that the root of the political economic turmoil within the European Union lies in the abandonment of fundamental aspect of European identity, which is its Christian heritage. So let's begin with the Lisbon Treaty. In the preamble of Lisbon Treaty, we find the statement, quote, drawing inspiration from the cultural, religious, and humanist inheritance of Europe, from which have developed the universal values of the inviolable and inalienable rights of the human person, freedom, democracy, equality, and the rule of law. Close quote. This preamble raised an important question. What are the common foundations of the universal values that serve as the basis for European Union? Are these foundations rooted in Christian values, or do they stem from something else? If we look at the history of Europe, on the one hand, there are Christian values, which, although divided between the Eastern and Western Europe, represent the longest lasting ideological development of European nations. On the other hand, there is the liberal foundation of Europe, rooted in the rationalist philosophy of the Age of Enlightenment and the French Revolution. It was the influence of the liberal ideology that led to the creation of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, followed by the Constitutional Treaty for Europe, which later evolved into the European Reform Treaty, commonly known as Treaty of Lisbon. Therefore, the Treaty of Lisbon can be seen as a departure from the Christian roots of European culture, as suggested by Pope John Paul II and his successor, Pope Benedict XVI, during the formulation of the Constitutional Treaty for Europe. Now let's examine the series of crises that have occurred since the adoption of the Treaty of Lisbon. The first significant crisis was the 2010 European sovereign debt crisis, which threatened the stability of the Eurozone. The crisis began in Greece and spread to the other countries such as Portugal, Ireland, Italy, and Spain. It was caused by excessive government deficits, like private lending and the bursting of asset bubbles, which resulted in soaring borrowing costs and a loss of investor confidence. In response to this crisis, the European Union implemented bailouts, bank rescue measures, and the European Central Bank's bond purchases. These actions helped stabilize the situation, but it required significant austerity measures. At the root of this crisis is the concept of economic competition, which is based on the assumption of a market economy stemming from capitalism. This foundation is central to economic and financial policy of the European Union, but it is evident that this policy do not align with Christian values, which emphasizes the common good, subsidiarity, solidarity, and justice. Ultimately, the European Union prioritized profit and market interests over the measurement of the common good and economic life. After the economic crisis, the EU faced another challenge, the 2015 migrant crisis, which saw over 1 million migrants and refugees seeking asylum in Europe. This overwhelming influx put immense pressure on frontline countries like Greece and Italy. The situation resulted in significant humanitarian challenges, strained resources, and political divisions within the EU. In response, many European governments closed their borders, with most countries refusing to accept the arriving refugees. But Germany stood out by welcoming a large number of them. The migrant crisis unfolded during the year of pontificate of Pope Francis. He encouraged Christian institutions to open their doors to those in need, urging parishes and organizations to host families and engage in volunteer efforts to provide food, shelter, and long-term support for integration. But despite this appeal from the Pope, the public response from Christian communities was notably lacking. While Germany accepted many migrants, it did not express its action in terms of Christians' teaching or Christian values. Consequently, when there was significant divide among EU governments regarding the response to the crisis, Germany struggled to articulate an inappropriate response, especially when countries like Hungary closed their borders and framed immigrants as a symbol of threat to their predominantly Christian culture. The irony lay in the fact that the public discourse on Christian values during the migrant crisis focused more on protecting those values from immigrants rather than on the core of Christian teaching of compassion, hospitality, and justice for vulnerable people. The migrant crisis eroded confidence in the European Union, largely because the EU itself refrained from invoking Christian principles in its response. Instead, it largely relied on secular humanist approach. Now let me turn to the Brexit. In the referendum of June 2016, 52% of United Kingdom citizens voted to leave the EU. In March 2017, the UK triggered Article 50 of Treaty European Union, officially starting the process of withdrawal and the negotiations between the UK and the EU. In the context of Brexit, there was minimal involvement of Christian views or the church in the public debate. There was no discussion in the public square about whether the UK should remain in the EU based on the Christian values. No one made the case of staying because the EU's vision is rooted in Christian principle. Similarly, no one argued for leaving EU because the EU does not adhere to Christian values any longer, or suggested that despite some Christian elements in its vision, the EU is failing to uphold its values, is harming both its members and the others. It has been suggested that the EU is increasingly influenced by contemporary economic idols, as evidenced by the euro and its developing characteristics of an imperial project that do not respect the Christian principle of subsidiarity. While subsidiarity is honored in word, it is often not reflected in action, as EU competency extend into many aspects of the lives of member states without respecting their national integrity and identity. Here comes the crisis with Hungary and Poland. In December 2017, the European Commission opened a procedure against Poland, and on September 12, 2018, the European Parliament initiated a similar procedure against Hungary due to the concern about the respect for the rule of law. But the issues surrounding Poland and Hungary extend beyond just the rule of law. Reflecting on the migrant crisis of 2015, Hungary refused to comply with the EU relocation plan, arguing that it does not want to welcome refugees because it identifies as a Christian country. Poland has also, to some extent, invoked a similar argument, claiming that migrants are alien to its national culture identity. This reasoning connects to the broader rule of law concerns. Let's look what happened in Poland. On November 19, 2016, during a major ceremony marking the 1050th anniversary of Polish Christianity, Poland's President Andrzej Duda, alongside Polish Bishop at the Church of Divine Mercy in Krakow, enthroned Christ as the King of Poland. This ceremony raised at least two significant questions. First, if Jesus Christ is regarded as the ultimate manifestation of divine revelation, thus acknowledging him as the King of Poland through this ceremony suggests a new constitutional order based on Christian values. Secondly, to what extent this new Christian constitutional order align with the EU's common values as outlined in Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union. So finally, let me say briefly about COVID crisis. During the COVID crisis in 2019, the rule of Christian values primarily focused on the two issues, the morality of vaccines and religious freedom, particularly regarding the closure of church buildings and the suspension of worship services. But the COVID crisis touches a broader issue beyond just these two topics. In the context of the European Union, there has been noticeable absence of public debate on how Christian values address the pandemic's effects on social inequalities. Additionally, discussion around the Christian response to welfare states, social policy, and crisis governance have been largely overlooked. This neglect is reminiscent of the first economic crisis in 2010, which raised a question about the common good. Moreover, there has been little discussion in the public sphere about the pandemic impacts on social solidarity. It is crucial to explore how Christian values of solidarity can be applied during such crisis. Another area lacking attention is the psychological consequences of the pandemic, particularly regarding the well-being and resilience of the children. Lastly, there has been insufficient dialogue on how Christian values relate to the culture and lifestyle during the pandemic. Let me conclude now by stating that the argument that I presented today is that the European Union has neglected its Christian heritage and has become one of the factors that contributed to the decline of its democratic structure and increased tension among member states. To thrive in the future, the EU must revisit its Christian roots by considering the question posed by the late Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, or known as Pope Benedict XVI. That is, what is Europe? Ratzinger argued that it is a big mistake to view the European Union solely as an economic, political, and legal community. Europe must rediscover its constitutional identity, which is based on the interplay of Christian faith, legacy of Greek and Roman reasons. Thank you.